Hello everyone, here I am with the promised list of what else I saw in May. These are all the movies I watched last month that I didn't already tell you about, starting with a newer movie, well, newer for me. Number 1 is 2023's Asteroid City, the latest Wes Anderson film set in the 1950s in which people gathered in a pokey desert town for a junior stargazers convention witness a visit from an extraterrestrial. I guess that's the best way to summarize it, except that leaves out the whole other aspect in which the film is actually a play and we're watching its development with snapshots of the actors, writer, director, etc. Really, the alien part is a small element. This was my first live-action Wes Anderson movie. Before this, I had seen Isle of Dogs, but I never felt that was the best representation of his famous style. However, now that I've seen Asteroid City, it turns out it's not so far off. The most amazing thing to me is how he manages to make so many things that are real look so fake. Surroundings, sets, props, people, they all look weirdly artificial, and the delivery of the dialogue is just as unrealistic, on purpose. It's also amazing how many people are in this movie. I guess everybody in Hollywood jumps at the opportunity to work on a Wes Anderson production, no matter how small the part. Did I like the movie? I don't know. It was humorous sometimes, but it was so bizarre, so aggressively weird that it felt overdone. Like it was quirky just for the sake of being quirky. I think I prefer quirkiness be more natural or incidental. I was also stunned when the end of the movie came and the characters were like, what was the point of it all? What was the play about? And I just felt like, I don't know. You're supposed to tell me. Maybe they did offer an explanation, and I'm just not artsy-fartsy enough to have caught it. I felt like it ended, and that was it. It was heavy on style and eccentricity, and there was a little substance there, but not much. Now all the Wes Anderson fans are gonna come for me. I'm sorry, I saw lots of glowing review headlines, some even hailing it his best work yet, so I know some people liked it. If you like his stuff, then you probably thought it was great, and that's fine. But the aesthetic just wasn't for me. Let's move on. Movie number 2 is a viewer recommendation, 1954's Gorilla at Large. An amusement park becomes the center of a murder investigation when a dead man is found inside a ferocious gorilla's habitat. What a wacky movie this was! It was filmed in 3D and bold Technicolor, but the storyline and characters scream film noir, so it's a bit topsy-turvy. It boasts a surprising cast of rising stars. Cameron Mitchell, future B-movie legend, stars opposite young Anne Bancroft's trapeze artist femme fatale, who's married to Raymond Burr's park manager. Lee J. Cobb has some great wisecracks as the jaded detective, and young Lee Marvin plays the heck out of his small role as a hotshot cop. Cobb and Marvin have quite a few humorous lines between them, but everyone else plays it straight, which is hilarious because the film revolves around a gorilla that is obviously a guy in a monkey suit. This was distracting, not just because it looked funny, and because I kept expecting a reveal that the gorilla was a sham, but because I started wondering who was playing the gorilla, and if it was the same suit used in 1953's Robot Monster. So I looked it up afterward, and what do you know? Goliath the gorilla is played by George Barrows, who is most known for his performance, his dual performance, in Robot Monster. I knew I recognized that suit! The color looks great, although maybe it's not the best fit for a monkey suit movie. Black and white could have aided the viewer's suspension of disbelief and made the climax slightly more convincing. As it is, we can see all too clearly, therefore it's impossible to take it as seriously as I believe was intended. But it's not a loss, because all of these factors come together to make this oddity of a film very entertaining. Movie number 3 is 1972's The Other, a twisted story directed by Robert Mulligan about rambunctious twin boys and the tragic mishaps that befall their family in the 1930s. I read the book a couple years ago, and for the most part, I really liked it, even though it's not the kind of thing I typically read. I heard good things about this adaptation, which has proven very difficult to find, but recently I found an upload on YouTube where the film was apparently ripped off a VHS tape, and the quality is pretty good. As for the film itself, it was alright. I didn't enjoy it as much as I expected to, given how engrossing I found the novel. Tom Tryon adapted the screenplay from his own book, and he kept the slower pace and the atmosphere, but I missed the book's narration and its framing device and its tone. The book has a unique voice that is laid back and nostalgic and confusing, and that was a big part of what I liked about it, and it's just not here. The film adds a deceptively light, airy score by Jerry Goldsmith, and many sunny scenes to offset the increasingly disturbing subject matter. I did find this tamer than the book, where the reveals are more shocking. Here you hardly ever see anything, and you have to do some guessing. It was well cast, though. The twin boys, Chris and Martin Udvarnicki, in their only film appearance, do a good job, as do Uta Hagen as their grandmother and Diana Muldaur as their delicate mother. Movie number 4 is a documentary, Everest, which was filmed in '96 but released in '98. Filmmaker David Brashears joins climber Ed Viesturs and a couple others on an expedition to summit the tallest mountain in the world, their venture coinciding with the biggest disaster in Everest's history. When I found out in March that David Brashears had passed away, it reminded me that though I have read several books and watched a couple movies about the '96 disaster, I never did see his documentary, so I rented it. It's astonishing to think of this team hauling those big, bulky IMAX cameras through the Himalayas and up the mountain. They captured some beautiful footage, and I'm sure it was breathtaking to see it on an IMAX screen in 1998. Unfortunately, it's a bit dated now, in terms of graphics and definition, and it was also shorter than I expected, clocking in at just 44 minutes. It was good, but it left me wanting more. Movie number 5 is 2010's Predators. This third installment in the series finds a motley crew of individuals dropped into an unidentifiable jungle where they realize they're being hunted in a sophisticated, otherworldly version of the most dangerous game. If you've seen my last couple What Else I Saw videos, then you know that I've been making my way through the Predator films because I want to watch Prey. But I was also looking forward to seeing this one and forming my own opinion in the Predator 2 versus Predators debate. And my verdict is, I definitely liked watching this more, but I don't think it's a great movie. Predators stars Adrian Brody, who I thought was an unusual choice for this kind of role in this kind of film, but this was just a few years after he starred in Peter Jackson's King Kong, and he's kind of bulked up, and he uses a throaty Christian Bale Batman kind of voice, so I guess it works. I thought this movie had a good setup and fair execution. It had atmosphere and a sense of foreboding, decent intensity, some more likable and more developed characters. The creature designs were ugly, as usual. So ugly. And with new masks for the predators that are even creepier. Some of them are downright evil looking. I think the infrared screen segments make more sense in the jungle settings than in Predator 2's crowded city. I liked that there were some nods to the first film, and I liked that Alan Silvestri's themes were included. However, on the flip side, I'm not sure the updated effects were a huge improvement. Some of the CGI is better, but there were things I thought looked more impressive in the older films. The picture also seemed awfully dark in many scenes, at least on the Blu-ray I watched, which made me realize something else I appreciated about the first film, is that it's well lit. I offer this film as an example of a group of big tough guys and one tough woman thinking they're undefeatable with their huge guns and muscles and battle experience before being brought to their knees by a superior fighter. Fighters plural in this case. This is clearly conveyed without cheesy slow motion, bulging veins and muscles, copious sweat, and sex jokes. All of that is what I hated in the first one. And in the second one, it was the gratuitous sex and nudity. This movie still has lots of language and violence and gore, but on the whole, I found it less offensive, and that made for a more pleasant, well, I wouldn't say pleasant, but a better viewing experience for me. I don't swear, but hearing F-bombs doesn't make me keel over. There are a few crude lines, but they all come from the pervy creep we're not supposed to like anyway. And the gore, while excessive, wasn't unbearable. Sometimes gore in older films is more disturbing than in newer ones. Older films have redder blood as opposed to this blackish, brownish liquid. Not to be gross. I don't know if it's a practical effects versus CGI thing or what, but whatever the reason, this felt less gross to me. So, it has all of that going for it. Then again, I didn't like it as much as I had anticipated I would. Lawrence Fishburne plays an interesting role. I like the premise. There were parts that gave me goosebumps. But it also had a going through the motions feeling in a couple spots, and I thought the ending was kind of lame. I saw this a few weeks ago now, and as the days have gone by, I have found it more forgettable than the first two. Say what you will about Predator 2, it's a more creative sequel, and it made a stronger impression. Movie number 6 is the 1986 animated drama When the Wind Blows. An older couple dutifully takes steps to prepare for nuclear war using contradictory pamphlets to make a shelter. But when the bombs hit, they're woefully unable to comprehend the extent of the catastrophe. This is an interesting piece of art that creatively combines live action, stop-motion animation, hand-drawn animation, paintings, etc. Just because the characters look like they belong on that show Caillou doesn't mean it's for toddlers. Animation does not always equal kids' movie. Of course, you could show this to a child if you want to scare them half to death. I certainly knew about bombs and radiation from an early age, and I think I'm better off for being informed instead of living in a bubble of unawareness. But not every kid is the same. I was a mature child who watched movies with my older siblings and my parents. I probably saw lots of things that, well, anyway. But you don't want to show kids something that they can't handle that'll give them nightmares for the rest of their lives. So use your discretion. I really would not recommend this for kids. Needless to say, it's a depressing story, and sometimes a frustrating one. The couple, voiced perfectly by John Mills and Peggy Ashcroft, is constantly confusing the present situation with how things were in their younger days during World War II. In their ignorance, they repeatedly downplay the severity, and their forgetfulness, paired with their isolation, is fatal. The film doesn't shy away from details as the inevitable comes, but as ghastly as it gets, there's somehow a note of optimism about the future, a hopefulness that you may interpret as inspiring or sadly delusional. When the Wind Blows always shows up on nuke movie lists, and I'd wanted to see it for a long, long time, but only recently did my library network acquire a copy. After all of that, did it live up to expectations? Well, yes. I had heard it was a grim, tragic, blunt movie, and it was. What was most surprising was actually the amount of humor, although I found it difficult to laugh at the characters' naive mistakes, knowing what was ahead. Movie number 7 is 1941's A Yank in the R.A.F. Tyrone Power stars as a pilot who follows his fed-up girlfriend Betty Grable across the pond to London, joining the Royal Air Force to impress her and be close by. But the R.A.F. is busy raiding Berlin, so he's often not around when he says he'll be, which leaves an opening for another guy to take his place. This was alright. It's heavy on the love triangle, which I've said before is not something I'm keen on in my war movies. But they are in England during the Blitz. There are some missions. I believe the special effects won the Academy Award, and I think this might be the first cinematic recreation of the evacuation and aerial battle at Dunkirk. I found the story itself annoying, though. I like Tyrone Power, but his character here is too silly and too pushy, and he didn't deserve Grable. Not that I was terribly impressed with her either. Note this is a couple years before she became the #1 pinup girl. The film co-stars John Sutton as the other man, and Reginald Gardner, who would like to be the other man if he'd get a chance. It's not a bad movie. It was just meh. I'm more interested in Tyrone Power's real adventures, enlisting in the Marines in '42 and piloting cargo planes in the Pacific. Movie number 8 is also a World War II movie, this one set in China, 1960's The Mountain Road. Jimmy Stewart's major leads a demolition crew in blowing up a bridge to keep Japanese forces out of China. The dangerous mission is complicated by the addition of a Chinese general's widow requiring an escort. This is an interesting film. Jimmy Stewart is good, as usual. I feel like for someone else in the role this would be a milestone performance, but for Jimmy Stewart it's like, yep, about what I expect. Future Chinese-American star Lisa Liu, in her second film appearance, is very good as the widow who becomes an interpreter of both the language and the culture, and Harry Morgan stands out as a sarcastic but sensitive sergeant who isn't afraid to speak his mind. There are a few moments of levity, but primarily the film is a bleak picture of Chinese-American relations. Stewart struggles to communicate what he wants and to understand their ways, but the situation gets messed up. The Americans do things that are morally questionable, but they're also confronted by harshness and brutality. And what do you do when the people you're trying to save from a mutual enemy are violently hostile toward you? This isn't really something I'd like to rewatch. It gets rather heavy, and it's also weakened slightly by an unconvincing hint of romance. But it's a well-made, well-acted film. Movie number 9 is 2010's Burning Bright. During a hurricane, a young woman finds herself and her autistic little brother trapped in an old house with a bloodthirsty tiger. I know that sounds wildly implausible, but trust me, the movie makes it work. It's a tense little thriller. There's not much to it, but it gets the job done, and I liked it better than the 2 Lion movies I saw last year. The main girl is quite good. She does spend a lot of time peering around corners and peeking through cracks and doors, but she handles both the intense and dramatic scenes well. Garrett Dillahunt plays the stepfather who's setting up a wildlife safari tourist trap, in which the main feature is a tiger he bought from none other than Meatloaf in a quick, uncredited role. I liked this. It was simple, it was effective, they made it work. Movie number 10 is a rewatch of 2017's Life. I talked about this when I saw it the first time, but here's a second review. The premise is familiar. The crew of the International Space Station, on a mission to search for life, is overwhelmed by an antagonistic foreign organism with astonishing abilities. It's definitely derivative of Alien, with additional notes of the Andromeda Strain and 2001: A Space Odyssey. The music at times even reminded me of Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra. But that doesn't matter, and I enjoyed this both times I saw it. I think it's a very good, scary, intense alien movie. Jake Gyllenhaal leads a strong international ensemble cast, and the alien life form is a fascinating specimen. The design is cool, and the special effects crew and the animators and so on did a great job making it move. Unlike my mom, who didn't remember anything from when we watched this a few years ago, and that's okay, we watch an awful lot of movies, and she does not take notes on them like I do. Unlike her, I remembered quite a bit. Mostly the gross stuff, like the major turning point sequence where everything goes south. That made me as queasy this time as it did the first time. I've also always remembered the story's cruel twist of irony. My one complaint is that the audio is uneven. The music is sometimes very loud. This was the era of blah soundtracks, but the characters tend to speak very quietly. The dialogue should have been turned up louder. There were definitely lines I missed. Other than that, though, good show. And movie number 11 is 2001's Black Hawk Down, director Ridley Scott's depiction of the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, a risky military operation to capture a Somali warlord's lieutenants in a crowded, hostile city turns deadly when a Black Hawk helicopter is shot down and crashes, and the ruthless enemy descends on the site. The Americans are determined that no one gets left behind, but in trying to rescue their comrades, the men risk their own lives, resulting in heavy casualties amid a prolonged fight. I've heard people rave about this movie for a long time, and because I watch a lot of war movies, I'd wanted to see it. But I kept holding off because my mom had seen it, and every time it comes up, she's like, "Oh, that's a terrible movie," meaning that she finds it unbearably stressful and maddening. And it doesn't help that she remembers when the event happened and how awful it was. For me, though, she was willing to watch it again because she's a good sport. I have to agree to a certain extent that this is a particularly relentless film. Once the action begins, it goes on and on. There's a lot happening, and it grants the characters and the audience barely any reprieve. The amount of death and carnage is distressing, the bureaucratic element is frustrating, and it's a graphic war movie with realistic injuries. It's a lot to take in, and it's no wonder I felt a little dazed by the end of it. It was a welcome distraction to make note of how many familiar faces are in this movie and how many of the actors are not Americans. There are several English actors, Jason Isaacs, Orlando Bloom, Tom Hardy, Hugh Dancy, one Scottish, Ewan McGregor, one Australian, Eric Bana, one Danish, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, and Ion Gruffudd, or however you say his name, has a tiny role, and he's Welsh. So that was amusing. Meanwhile, the American stars are Josh Hartnett, Sam Shepard, Tom Sizemore, William Fichtner. Have I forgotten anyone? The point is, there are a lot of people in this movie who were famous then or have become famous since, and that was very helpful. It would have been harder to keep track of who was who and where, doing what, if I didn't know so many of the actors. I'm aware that Black Hawk Down has inaccuracies and takes liberties with the truth in order to tell a more dramatic story. Films about real events generally do. I found it very intense, kind of exhausting, seemingly hopeless at times, but also a really good war movie spotlighting acts of heroism and sacrifice. And that's what else I saw in May. I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, you can find a list of the films and where/how I watched them in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any of the titles I mentioned here in the comments below. I look forward to reading all of them, and I'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching.